I guess we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Lent with the Desert Elders. This is week 2, and we're going to be talking about sacrifice. And I'm glad you can all join me. Some of you will be doing this on replay. And I wanted to bring elements from my book, The Way of the Desert Elders. And some of you may have bought it. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. This is a book that came out in late January this year. And it really features the stories and the wisdom and the sayings and really inspiring people from this general 300s to 600s AD. And so I wanted to bring these elders in conversation with us at Lent. So I'm I'm struggling to read my notes at this moment, but there's 6 themes of Lent traditionally we can explore. And last week we explored repentance, and you can go back and see that on, I believe, Substack and YouTube, and I'm not sure how Facebook does it, but there's a few places you can find it. And this time is sacrifice. And this is one of those topics that can, I think for some of us, has been difficult because maybe we've been shamed into sacrificing a lot, or what does sacrifice mean in a healthy way? So I wanted to invite Lindsay on. Lindsay O'Connor is my guest host, and each week there'll be a different guest host. Now, you don't have to get the book to follow along. It will help you kind of understand the context for what we're doing, but that's not necessary to be part of this and join us during Lent. My hope really is just that you get to explore these 6 themes and come along for our conversation and see where it goes. And hopefully it draws you into a deeper relationship with God and with others, and perhaps some new inspiring figures from history, Christian history, along the way. So if you care to get a digital version of the book right now, even to reference what we're talking about sometimes, you can go to tiny.cc/elders. Just grab it off of Kindle and read it on your browser if you want, if you are into that kind of thing. And each week, of course, will be a new theme and a new conversation partner. So welcome, Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining us. And maybe you can tell viewers a little bit about you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I am a spiritual director. I'm here in Dallas, Texas, and I'm also an Enneagram practitioner. So a lot of times I use Enneagram work with my directees. And I love learning about the Desert Elders and all things contemplation from Lisa. She's been such a kind and gentle and helpful and wise voice and leader in my life through her books and through our interactions online. So I'm really excited to join the conversation.
And I'm really, really thrilled you can be here. I'm excited to explore some of these themes with a spiritual director. It's somebody who's attuned to how we journey with God in, and not just kind of, I'm obeying God and doing all the things I'm supposed to do, but are we finding healing? Are we finding connection with others? And what does that look like? And so having a spiritual director on is kind of, this is, I hope, a treat for other people because we don't always talk in these types of ways. We'll hear a lot of messages that maybe come from pastors or from teachers specifically, but your point of view, Lindsay, I think is really valuable as we explore these topics of Lent. So I wanted to start a little bit off by, maybe it's the elephant in the room about Lent. Lent is a time that we are, sometimes we feel pressured to be more austere. Sometimes we feel guilty and feel like we have to give something up and make sure we're being a good girl or a good boy for God. And certainly the Desert Elders fell into some of these traps with overdoing it with their austerity and with their asceticism. I think it's just important to say that up front. It's not like, in my book, I'm saying, do all the things these people did. Sometimes they went way too far. But their inspiration and their devotion for us now is something that can be a good example. So I'm hoping we can learn from them in this context. And um, of course, they were always giving up something sacrificially. So with this theme of Lent this week being sacrifice, of course, their lives every moment or every day was going to be a sacrifice compared to what it would have been if they had stayed in their villages or towns in during the time of the Roman Empire. So I just wanted to kind of get that out up front, that they were always sacrificing. They're maybe sacrificing too much, but they were giving up a comfort or a desire or a kind of life for an austere one. So we're not expected to do that, and I wanna underscore that too. I'm not saying, "Hey, let's all be like the desert elders for 40 days." That's not gonna be that's not gonna be helpful to us, and God is not happier when we sacrifice. God doesn't love us more than, or, we don't earn God's love. It's important that maybe we know that technically, theoretically, but do we really know that God doesn't love us or like us any less when we don't, and when these payoffs don't happen of this kind of sacrifice and austerity? It's a free gift. God's love is a free gift. So, but can we learn something from the desert elders? And then we can explore that today. So, I'll just kind of kick it off with you, Lindsay, and say, what have you thought about as I brought up this topic, and I've sort of put this put this theme in your mind, and you thought, what are we going to talk about, or what should I say? What are some of the things that you've been mulling over a little?
Well, I will be honest and say the first thing I said to Lisa, my first thought was, I don't know if I'm the right. I told my husband, I don't know if I'm the right guy for the job.
Right,
um,
right.
and
Mhm,
Lisa was so kind and gracious to let me voice that. And the reason
mhm,
is because as a spiritual director, I work with a lot of people who have experienced abuses of power that make this a really, really difficult
mhm,
topic. And
mhm,
so I think that is actually why it's really important that we talk about it. So
mhm.
I appreciate the chance to kind of work through some of the helpful and not helpful ways that
Yeah.
people think and talk about sacrifice.
And I'm so glad you brought it up. It wouldn't really have occurred to me, but I think because you did, it was a prompting of the Spirit, and I wanted to be sensitive to that and say, "That is from your point of view and from some of the companioning I've done, and from my own life, I'll say, spiritual abuse is a real thing, and that can come in the form of you're not doing enough. You're you're pressured to make sure you're checking off all the boxes, or that you're going to enough services, or that you're serving on enough committees, and it is sacrifice demanded again and again, but not in generative ways necessarily, not in ways that make us feel closer to others and closer to God. And so it can come up in these one-on-one interactions about spiritual abuse and what was expected of somebody. And even though this isn't maybe a typical way to speak about sacrifice during Lent, people that during Lent are saying, "What are you giving up? Did you give up chocolate? Did you give up sugar?" And maybe I should be giving those up. I should probably be giving up sugar. Um, there's there's a real importance to speak about sacrifice in healthy ways. I think God does want us to sacrifice not for something we earn, to be in God's good graces, but there are certain things we can sacrifice for our own good, or for a period of time to draw us into focus. And so
Mhm.
what could that look like? And I wanted to ask Lindsay, just from your opinion, what are some of the reasons you think we might fear or avoid sacrifice, other than what we have already said, like spiritual abuse tendencies and things like that?
I think there are lots of different ways that it can cause discomfort. I think one of them is it's hard to feel like any sacrifice is enough, and so
Mhm,
it's kind of like how do I begin? It seems, if we're talking about God and all that God and Jesus sacrificed for us, how could my sacrifice be enough?
mm,
So that can feel overwhelming. And then I think
yeah,
also for people who have experienced um, sacrifice, giving something up in a way that has harmed themselves, like
mhm,
especially when we think of fasting and eating disorders, that can get
right,
really, really tricky
right,
because fasting is not a safe practice for everybody, or
right,
fasting from food is not a safe practice for
mhm,
everybody. And so
right,
I think it's usually something related to either an abuse of power or some kind of harm that we've experienced, maybe not from
mhm,
someone, maybe from our own need for healing in the ways that we
mm.
have harmed ourselves.
That's really well said. Um, I know when I've struggled with food or with fasting or with refraining from eating, not for spiritual reasons, but because of my own issues or other pressures I feel, it has usually tended to be my wanting to control
Mm,
something in my
mhm,
life. And and that's not coming from a good place of wanting to control something. That would be coming from a place of shame or insecurity
mm,
or something I'm trying to compensate for, and it's coming out in the form of refraining from food. And I think that's, I talk about fasting in the book, and I talk about how that was a typical normal thing for these hermits to do.
mm,
But then there are other instances where there was a much more generous idea in terms of refraining from food. It was, you know, it, we hear the stories of, they hardly ate anything or they're eating herbs and stuff like this, and it can drive us toward feeling like we're not doing enough. Like,
mhm,
well, they're so devoted, but I'm good with my snacks, and maybe I should be doing this or that or the other thing. And so when it comes to sacrifice, generally speaking, what are some ways you think we should alter our thinking or try to reframe it?
I think one of the most important things is that it is coming from a place of agency, not a place
Mm,
of, not that it is being demanded of us or required of
mm,
us,
mhm.
especially by somebody who is in a higher higher power, not like God, but somebody who has
Yeah,
some kind of power over us, if we consider
right.
power structures. So, an authority
Mhm,
figure or something, it needs to be done from a place of agency, which is the example we see with Jesus. We see in the life of
mhm,
Jesus that Jesus was over and over again being given choices and making really, really difficult, the most difficult choices from a
mm,
place of freedom and agency. And so I think freedom and agency are really important. And then I also think the other example we see in the life of Jesus is that it's for the benefit of others. And so
mhm,
it's not
mhm,
just to punish ourselves or to have a sense of control, like you mentioned.
mhm.
Sometimes we can even to me it's even like the bargaining stage of grief sometimes where
Oh, wow.
we not on purpose, but we're trying to control or manipulate God by if I give this up, then you can do this thing for me.
Yeah.
And that is a normal part of a grieving process and it deserves compassion, but it is different
Mm,
than the kind of sacrifice that we're talking about with Lent, I think.
right, the bargaining, hoping that if you do something on your end, God might do something on God's end, is there was a period in my life where I would wind up thinking those thoughts a lot. I would
Hmm.
wind up thinking of God more like interacting in my life. I don't wanna say like a genie, but in a weird way that I don't think is a helpful image of God. It's like, well, if I do this, like God's keeping all these track of me.
Hmm.
There's this thing that didn't go so well, so why don't you make up for it by doing this? And I think that can be a really unhealthy way to see God. If we're not seeing God as the lover of our soul, truly loving us and liking us. And that's the default. That's not a lot of us have been brought up with an angry God, a policeman
Hmm.
God, a wrathful God, and looking for us to kind of screw up to be disappointed but maybe Jesus will talk him into being, sparing our lives. And I think that's a really unhealthy it's that's a God actually not worth worshiping. I If there is a God like that out there, I'm probably not gonna do real well in the outcome, and I might as well not waste my time worshiping a God like that because that's a monster. So,
Mm,
if we think that God's a monster, probably not good to even bother worshiping, but if we think God is actually a loving creator of the universe, lover of our souls, um, and exemplified in Jesus and the way that Jesus interacts with people, the way Jesus is generative and gracious and giving. And if that's God, if Jesus is God with skin on, it's a different it's a different way to understand sacrifice. And it would be sort of sacrificing along with Jesus, along with others in even in companioning with that, but not thinking of it as some sort of way to get control or earn love or any of those things we can sort of get sucked into. And one of the things I wanted to ask, because you do so much work with the Enneagram, and I have very little. I mean, I did Enneagram stuff like probably 8 years before it started getting really popular, and I kind of have nibbled around the edges of it. But I know that's part of your training and experience, and I know you encountered my book with some of those ideas in mind.
Mhm.
So from your training and experience, who do you think struggles with warped or unhealthy dimensions of sacrifice?
Oh gosh, man, good
Maybe that's
question.
too big a
Um,
question to answer in this venue.
um, I think that it depends on what you mean by struggles with it, because there are some
Mhm.
numbers who sacrifice is the default way of being, but it is
Mm.
not always coming from a place that is helpful for them and for their well-being. So the first number that comes to mind is people who lead with type 2 are called
Mm.
the helpers. And especially if you are a woman who is, because in our society, women are, we are told that we are supposed to be helpers and we are supposed to
Mhm.
be sacrificing anyway. And then if you
Mhm.
have a personality that um,
Yeah.
that is highly motivated by helping others, it's not a
Mhm.
bad thing, it's a gift, but you could see how that could get you into a place of sacrificing to the point of burnout and not being able to take care of yourself.
So true. And also I think the demand on mothers is not everybody watching is gonna be a mom or anything like that. Maybe you'll just have fur babies that you care for. But for those of us who are mothers, I think there is a cultural demand there for sure, and a Christian cultural demand is that
Hmm.
everything's about the kids. And,
Hmm.
your lack of sleep or your burnout or you should be taking them to the soccer and the dance and all the things, and that's what a mother does. A mother sacrifices and even her health. And, I think those are all things that play into very, unhealthy, unsustainable ways of being in the world, and also teaches our kids that boundaries are not important to us, and
Hmm.
that, that's what they'll wind up imitating. That's what they'll wind up thinking. They won't think, "Wow, my mom's just sacrificing so much because she just loves me." They'll be thinking, "Oh, that's how to be in the world. I should,
Hmm.
never say no. I should,
Hmm.
not have any margin. I shouldn't know my limits. I sacrifice until you drop," kind of thing. And I think it's good to model that. Sometimes for me, because I felt like there've been some problems in my childhood. I thought, "I'm actually learning by doing it differently. I'm hoping to teach my kids something differently, and I'm hoping that I'm also learning it while I'm doing it too, as it's not gonna come naturally to me." Um, and so, motherhood, I don't know what your experience has been, Lindsay, in terms of that, extra element.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and I think it's well said. It's kind of the double thing of not only am I trying to do what's best for my kids, but I'm trying to sometimes do something different than what was modeled for me. And so
Mm,
holding all that together at once is really hard. And I do think, as you said, even for women who aren't mothers, I think
mhm,
there is an expectation that
yeah,
women are serving and sacrificing more and differently than the expectation
mhm.
for men.
Yeah, and with regards to men, it's not like they're not ever sacrificing or that there isn't
Sure.
an expectation for them to do it too. There are certain I believe there are certain, roles that we have, certain occupations and vocations that we have that, for instance, when I was in seminary, all the guys who there were these were guys who were gonna be pastors. They were, I think, more tenderhearted than a general population of males. It seemed to me very service oriented, very much felt meaning from sacrifice and from service, and in ways that I think was extra. So it might depend, like if you're in the medical profession or first responder or something like that, sacrifice might be something that you think is regularly demanded of you and that you feel like you
Mm,
have to live up to. That can be, it can be an unhealthy um, boundary that winds up getting crossed or something like that. And I think about all the men I've known who really go above and beyond all the time, heading for burnout and thinking of sacrifice in maybe ways that are really not generative and um, not something God hopes for us, in our
mhm.
lives. So, And I wanted to also um, kind of bat this other thing around too, is some of the unhealthy traps that maybe you've experienced, Lindsay, or maybe you've witnessed, um, and how does shame sometimes play into this specifically?
Mm. That question is really near and dear to my heart because a lot of my journey, around the same time I discovered the Enneagram and started learning about that, I was
Mhm.
also I was just beginning to name that I was really dealing with shame in my spiritual
Mm.
life. And
Mhm.
I have two daughters, and after each of them, I had about a year after each one was born, I really struggled with my mental health with
Mhm.
postpartum depression and anxiety.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I as I started to feel better mentally,
Mhm.
what I realized was the thing that was lingering was not the anxiety or depression. It was
Mm.
a sense of shame of
Mm.
why was this so hard for me? There's so many people who are mothers and
Mm.
parents who do this and it doesn't seem that hard. What's wrong with me? Why did I struggle with it two times? What lesson did I
Mm.
not learn? Why was it
Oh.
so hard? And so that was kind of the place. I was in a really raw place when I discovered the Enneagram, which gave me some language
Mm.
for the way that that struggle played out for me specifically. I lead with type 6, and we are worst case scenario planners.
Oh,
And
okay.
when
Okay.
your worst case scenario planning doesn't work anymore,
Mm.
it's then, when our regular tools stop working, it feels like a crisis and we're trying to figure out how to manage our lives.
Mm.
And so, and for me, that whole journey, my whole life was for them. When they were
Mm.
little, they had
Mhm.
trouble eating and sleeping, and
Mm.
we had some medical stuff, and so I wasn't getting sleep. And
Mm.
we're just in a like many people in the U.S. We don't live close to family that could help. We didn't have a lot of other
Wow.
support, and so be coming out of that season, and
Mm.
then when I finally started feeling well enough to start going to church and
Mhm.
hearing pastors and other leaders at the church talk about how we need to be more selfless and we need to
Mhm.
sacrifice,
Mm.
was just it was crushing, and also it became infuriating,
Mhm.
because I was looking around at all these young moms that I knew at our church who were
Mhm.
trying to figure out how could I give more when they were just
Yeah.
falling apart because they were giving so
Yeah.
much. And
Mm.
so for me, that was a really personal, specific example of sacrifice and shame and how
Mm.
difficult that is, or how difficult it can be. I'm sure there's a million examples, but that's how it looked in my life.
Yeah. I've often thought about, pastors who come up with, their sermons or something like that. Now I realize AI is playing a lot into some of these what these pastors are doing these days. Not my pastor for sure, but many. And also just, some I've heard pastors say they're actually creating the sermon for themselves really, like maybe
Mm,
that pastor wasn't sacrificing enough. Maybe they felt like they should be more selfless, and then they wind up kind of projecting that out. And I also wonder, like, what if male pastors ran their sermons past women first? Is
yeah,
that crazy? Am I
I've
crazy to
had that
think that?
thought also.
I'm like, maybe you're maybe people won't go storming out the door, all the time, but also just there's so many blind spots we have, and I could say the
Sure.
same thing for female pastors, as well. It's just that we are better with some feedback, with some,
Mhm,
um, more eyes looking at it than just our own, and,
mhm,
um, so, what you say rings so true, not for my recent past, but, um, that whole idea of, it feels like it's never enough, and then there's
mhm,
a lot of, especially, like, in my childhood, there's a lot of, like, be a good submissive wife, and all the
mhm,
things that add to the burden, instead of alleviating burdens, instead of giving
mhm,
people more energy to handle their day and to walk with God, the burden gets more and more. I think about Jesus talking about towards the Pharisees, you don't wanna help anybody with their burden, you wanna
mm,
just keep heaping on, I think if we have any kind of authority or leadership or responsibility, we have to be extra careful that we're not laying on heavier burdens, that we're
Yes.
actually benefiting people's lives. And that's not to say that people shouldn't be convicted of sin or something like that, or that people don't make mistakes that should be to have some correction. But if it's always sort of like you're slam dunking on everybody, um, we might need to rethink how people are are sensing the messages that we're putting out.
Mm,
We can get blind to that when we're in positions of authority, I think. So what you're saying is very salient. I think we can also maybe even get good at pushing back and saying,
mm,
I understand that sermon was for somebody, but you have to here's my perspective, and maybe
mhm,
people aren't as interested in hearing what other people's perspectives are. Um, I know, when it comes to, like, unhealthy traps of sacrifice, there's different ways it can come in, different back doors, and you don't even
mhm,
realize that it's happening until you're like, "Wow, I have no energy, I'm really burned out." And now
mhm,
it feels like you're in a hole by that point, right?
mhm.
And so, considering Lent and what it tends to be, what tends to ask of us, these 40 days that lead up to Easter usually ask something of us.
Mm.
But, I'm wondering what are some ways we can reframe this time that it adds something to our life instead of asking us to take something away. Wondering how you've encountered Lent before, or what you might recommend if somebody's been struggling with it.
Yeah, I last year I used, and this year I've been I referenced it in some teaching I did yesterday,
Mhm.
a book by Christine Walters Paintner called A Different Kind of Fast. I
Yeah.
love her work. I love her writing.
Mhm.
It's very, she has a lot of on-ramps for people for whom some of the language might be new. It's very simple and beautiful. But
Mm.
one of the things I love she talks about in that book is, again, I'm relating this to fasting because in my mind
Mhm.
that's similar to the idea of sacrifice.
Yeah.
But she talks about emptying to be filled. And so
Mm.
the idea of identifying the things that are obstacles to receiving and giving love to others, receiving love from God, being close to God, and
Mm.
then giving love to others. What are those things that are obstacles? And maybe fasting from something related to that, or sacrificing during Lent related to that,
Mhm.
for the purpose of it. It's one thing to sacrifice just to be empty, which has its
Mm.
place, but it
Mhm.
really helps me for people that feels really hard and uncomfortable, and if it takes you to a place that is maybe mentally not a great place. To me, it
Mhm.
helps to realize I'm making room for something better. I'm fasting
Mm.
from things that have not been serving me well to make
Mhm.
room for something better. And so
Mhm.
um, the way I put that, an example of the way I put that with the Enneagram is I am a head type, and we have a
Mm.
lot of mental chatter and a lot of inner noise. And so for me this year, fasting looks like I am cutting out some of the things that contribute to my inner noise to make
Mm.
room to reconnect with God in a better way, instead of distracting myself as much as I usually do.
That is such a good point. I wanna dig into that just a little bit deeper. Um, we will tend to think automatically, "Okay, I'm not gonna eat chocolate for Lent. I'm not gonna have sweets or whatever. Or I'm not gonna have meat on Fridays." That's another one. "We're gonna have pizza every Friday now, but it's Lent," whatever. But what you're talking about is very mindful, and maybe you can talk about what does that look like fleshed out?
I think it looks like um, you have to have some awareness to begin with of what things are disrupting your connection with God, self, and others. And so that will be different for everybody.
Mm.
My bias, of course, is that it really helps to have a spiritual director to hash that out with, or just someone who
Yes.
loves you and knows you well. I've been meeting with my spiritual director for 5 years now, and so she knows
Mm.
a lot of my story and a lot about
Mhm.
me. And so um, when I meet with her, it's a helpful way for me to have reflected back to me the things that are drawing me closer to deeper connection with God, self, and others, and the things that are not, because again, it's not the same for everybody. And it's not
Mhm.
the same for one person in different seasons of your life. And
Mhm.
so we all have different demands on us in different seasons. And I recognize that because of my personality and my tendency to look for authority figures and
Mm.
experts, sometimes I
Yeah.
have to fast from taking in information from other voices
Mm.
because I can confuse those authority voices with the voice of the Holy Spirit, which sometimes it is. We certainly learn from
Mhm.
other people, but sometimes it gets really noisy and I can't pick out what is coming from where, and so I have to have some silence.
Yeah, and really what you're kind of moving towards is these ideas of discernment, and what does that
Mhm.
look like? Um, I wanna stress to anybody listening and you're not sure what the Enneagram is, how it could relate to you, we're gonna, talk a little bit about, um, what Lindsay does with the Enneagram, and you can get in touch with her, or you can learn about more, of what that's all about, and we'll make sure, Lindsay, that you tell us where to find you and how to get in touch if you want. The Enneagram is a great tool, um, so long as it's not weaponized against anybody or something like that,
Sure.
um, but it can be a really interesting discovery tool to find out what's neat about the Enneagram is that it kind of shows, like, in the best of circumstances, what you'll tend toward, in the worst of circumstances, and, like, inside your head or in your life, what you'll tend toward, and then it kinda helps give you some direction on why you might be butting up against other people who have a different way of seeing the world,
Mhm.
and your past woundedness will play into this, and so what it can do is kind of open up different doors of understanding toward yourself, of course, and how you relate to others and to God, but also for some of these different people in your life. They're probably not the same number as you, and that might be causing friction because of the different ways you go about life and the different things that you struggle with. So it's pretty insightful and incisive tool that if you're at all interested, hook up with Lindsay or look it up for yourself. I'm sure there'll be some resources that Lindsay can provide you, and we'll get to that as we wrap up. And the other thing I wanted to just reiterate is Christine Voltner's Painter. She is just she's like somebody that I have just consistently over the years. She's written prolifically, and all of it's good. Like, just grab any book of hers and you'll be impressed. There's been a bunch of times I've referenced her books on my podcast, and I'll be interviewing with her tomorrow and Claudia Love for what they do with Abbey of the Arts. So if you're listening to this, definitely look up Abbey of the Arts and what Christine's doing, because Lindsay's right. She's an incredible, wise voice that her books have been really life changing, and I think a lot of people feel the same way. Just as such a gift, and and she personally struggles with a lot of chronic pain. So this wisdom is like really hard. Is really
Mhm.
hard fought, and there's been a lot of suffering for her. And there's something about someone who's suffered a great deal and remains so supple and tender-hearted and kind that so many of us can learn from. So I highly recommend Christine, and I'm glad that you brought her up because um, she's been somebody who's I've gone to, her books and her again and
Mhm.
again to just kind of help find my way. So I think that, um, lots of books to choose from with Christine, and, let's just see, I wanted to cover, um, I guess related to you were one of the early readers of my book, Lindsay, and I was really grateful
Mhm.
for that, and when we think about the Desert Elders and Lent or sacrifice, um, do you think that there's more we can learn or more that we have to learn to say no to when it comes to, like, how they live their lives and draw a boundary there? What do you think?
I think it is a mixed bag, but
Good
I
answer.
will I will lead with what I appreciate about them and this and the
Mm,
things that you highlight in your book.
mhm,
I was thinking about this as I was thinking through our conversation ahead of time.
mhm,
I found that I was kind of dividing things into like a micro level and a macro level.
mm,
Um, and I think on kind of a micro, like individual level, Sorry, I'm looking down at some notes here.
Mhm.
Um, I appreciate that their commitment to slowing down and simplifying helps remove distractions from the things that
Mm.
we're avoiding, which kind of relates to what we
Mhm.
were talking about
Yeah.
earlier in thinking about what we're fasting from.
Yeah.
We are not great at doing that voluntarily. Sometimes it's forced upon us through
Yeah.
times of suffering or things that we don't
Mhm.
choose. But when
Mm.
we simplify our lives, and that usually involves some kind of sacrifice,
Mhm.
um, we have fewer distractions that keep us from those really tender places, some of the shadow places in ourselves that we are avoiding, and
Mm.
some of the maybe uncomfortable things that we need to have brought forward to experience the love and compassion of God and to experience healing.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so, on a micro level, I really appreciate that they modeled for us a simplified life,
Mhm.
freer from distractions, to help
Mhm.
focus and prioritize.
Mm.
Um, on a macro level, I was thinking, we're so in the West, we're so hyper individualistic,
Right.
but
Right.
and so I tend to think of when I think of the desert elders, you think of them being isolated and alone, but they were still in community.
Mhm.
And the bigger picture, which you talk about and highlight in your book, is that they were choosing to work together as a group, not just individuals,
Uh-huh.
to support each other in the sacrifice they were making, which
Mm.
was leaving the comforts of being within the Roman Empire for
Mhm.
the sake of living out their faith in a way that they felt like was more loyal to what they believed was following the way of Jesus. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
it would have been I imagine it would have been a lot harder to do that if they didn't have a community. You talk
Mhm.
about like they mentored each other, they supported each other. And
Mhm.
so that really had me thinking about what would that look like for us today? How do we divest from empire in
Mhm.
ways that we can rely on each other to
Mhm.
faithfully live out the way of Jesus, um, which are which are ways of resisting the oppressive parts of living under this empire.
Right, and, I was just having a brief conversation with my husband on the way home from some friend's house, and we were talking about abundance. The abundance that we live in the United States
Mm,
also becomes isolating because you can
mhm,
handle things on your own. You have autonomy, you don't really need people, and maybe it feels you feel bad asking for help, or you feel like you
mhm,
shouldn't rely on anybody because it's rugged individualism.
mhm,
But, in my experience in the Caribbean, it's it's a warmer environment. It's warmer climately climate-wise, but it's warmer in between people, and
mhm,
everybody needs each other more. There's the resources just aren't there. People get used to helping each other and the give and take. It's more communal just straight up off the bat. I think that's
mhm,
true in a lot of places, and we don't realize how abnormal we are to be so self-reliant. It's not good for us to be self-reliant. We
mhm,
feel loved when people help us out, or we should feel loved and cared for, and vice versa. We should be loving and caring for other people in need, but sometimes um there's a shame in needing help or asking for
mhm.
help until you're at your complete end. You're suffering terribly with an illness or something, and then people have to help you, and then you feel guilty or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these little traps that happen because our culture is abundant enough that we don't actually need each other if we're, it's some sort of middle class situation, or wealthy, then that seems to be the goal, right? You should
Mhm,
be pushing for this independence, for this autonomy. I think it's important that we divest from individualism too. That's
mhm,
part of our culture that says that we have to be successful all on our own, or that we have to make our own way, and um, instead be interdependent. And
mhm,
um, I want to underscore something you said too about community and the desert elders, is that for anybody who's also considering, do I want to go on a fast? Do I want to sacrifice something? What do I want to do with Lent? all these fasts that happened in the desert were supervised fasts.
Mm.
They didn't want people having negative effects, whether that's pride, I'm so good at fasting, or whether that's, now you're doing something unhealthy and
Mhm.
we're not going to allow it. We're going to take care of you. Um, we should have mentors when we do something like we need discernment. We're at a crossroads. We wonder we feel like we should sacrifice something that would be healthy, but what should it be and for how long? All those things. That really helps to have a spiritual director. And of course, I'm going to be a little biased on that myself. Lindsay and I are going to both be biased on that because we've walked with people, and we've been walked with. And once you've experienced that, you're like, wow, everybody should have a spiritual director. This really, really helps. And it's not a counselor. It's not a therapy. It's a companioning. It's listening for God. It's asking these questions and allowing the Spirit, not having quick answers, but allowing the Spirit to be a part of the conversation and part of the discernment. And it's also, I think, in my opinion, it slows you way down
Mhm.
in a really healthy way instead of rushing to the next decision or, oh, I better take a path. A lot of times your spiritual director will be like, let's sit with this. We don't have to
Mm.
have the answer today. We can sit with this. What does it look like? Ask some more questions and to not feel stressed and anxiety moving to some decision or something like that. So having that companionship was key for the desert elders. And I would love that we would have a renaissance of this idea now, that we would have mentors, whether it's spiritual friends that really know us, love us, want the best for us. There might be some pastors who are good at this, but I don't know that they're really trained for this in seminary unless they took special classes and went on a special track for it. You would have to ask, if you're interested in getting a director, make sure they're actually trained and they're in supervision and
Mhm.
that the ethics are there, because it can be manipulated by people who have bad faith, you could say. And so, and the one other thing I was thinking about as you were talking about removing things so that you can add things, I just cleaned out my closet and gave up on a bunch of clothes I know I'm not going to fit into. And I have two humongous garbage bags of clothes that are going to go to Goodwill or Salvation Army. And that's in order so that I can replenish my closet with some things I like that fit me now. And
Mhm.
it's it's a a grieving process to go through those clothes and to get rid of them, and it's
Mhm.
hard to do it. I put it off for a long time. There's things
Mhm.
in our life like that. They're cluttering,
Mhm.
they're not working for us anymore, they're not stuff we need to have. It's taking up mental space, it's bringing us down and lowering our energy, and if we can just kind of move them to the side, that does make space for, or just more space in your closet in general, right? Or your interior closet, so that you have enough energy and margin to receive.
Mm.
I think that sometimes we don't think about this time of Lent as a time of receiving. We think of it as a time of shedding or, you know, limiting ourselves or something like that. But it can be a time of receiving if we are living in simplified ways, because then we have the perception to see what we can receive. And I think that the idea of finding ways also to be less busy, and that's a luxury, I realize, for a lot of people. It's not like everybody can just go, oh sure, I'll just stop doing this and this, and like you, as if everybody has a choice in that matter. But I do think that if we find ourselves stretched way too thin, we can go through, like maybe like I would go through my closet, or what Lindsay is speaking of too. We can go through and say, should I be saying no to some stuff?
Mhm.
I've been pulled in because I think I should be doing this or that. But should I say no? And sometimes that's saying no to these machine of church even, or things
Mhm.
that are good. It's
Mhm.
going to be hard to say no to things that are, it's not saying no. I'm not saying it's going to be easy decisions. But sometimes we do have to simplify by saying, I've done this long enough. I've been involved in such and such for this amount of time, and now I need a break. And this
Mhm.
is where I'm going to give myself a break. I'm going to use Lent to see how, what would this look like if it felt just right? If it felt
Mm.
like balanced? What would that look like? And to kind of ask ourselves some of those questions. This time of Lent can be a time of sort of an refinement in that way. This is a really excellent point about making room and thinking of those adjustments. Is there anything else that you want to say related to this topic or related to the Desert Elders book, or just anything that you've been thinking right now that you want to share?
Yeah, I something that stands out to me, in what you were just saying is you mentioned as you were talking about literally cleaning out your closet, the grief that comes
Right.
up.
Mhm.
And I think I find that in spiritual direction, both when I meet with my director and when I meet with my directees, a lot of it is grief work because
Mm.
anytime we are letting go and shedding, which even when it is
Mhm.
something that we choose and even when it's something that we're happy to do, letting go and change is cause for grief, and
Mm.
we become attached to things and habits and mental patterns, behavioral patterns. And even when we recognize it's that they're not serving us and it's time to let them go, that is a grief process. And so I
Mm.
think it's important that the grief is acknowledged. And as you were
Mm.
talking about, I think that's one of the ways spiritual direction slows people down, just
Mhm.
to name what what it feels like to lose things.
Mm. That's so well said. I don't know that we even give ourselves it doesn't even sometimes enter into the picture, this is what's going on,
Mhm.
that it's grief. And that's why it really helps to have that outside perspective, someone naming that grief. Well, I think what you're going through is actually grief, and because it
Mm,
looks different for every person. Who you think is grief, for someone might not look like that for you. But grief is one of those things, you can't hurry it up.
mhm,
It has its own timeline, and it's usually slower than what we want, and then that's why it'll pop back up with a
mm,
vengeance sometimes. Like I've struggled with those things where um, someone passes away that I don't even know. I'm just bawling my eyes out. Well, I'm not grieving that person that I don't really know. I'm
mhm,
grieving someone else, something else that's happened, that the grief feels so fresh because it's
mhm,
really haven't found a way to deal with it.
mhm,
So really, really helpful to think about even this period of time moving up to Easter, which is supposed to be this big celebration of new life and rebirth and renewal and resurrection. If we don't do the work of grief and some of these other harder things that we might want to avoid, we don't get all the joy that could be coming to us in this new day, in this
mhm,
Resurrection Sunday. And, the things that are dead that need to be pruned, buried, to be resurrected. We actually have to go there in some of those uncomfortable places sometimes. So, as we begin to wrap up, I want to make sure you're able to speak to everybody to tell them where can they find you, what are you up to, and what would you like them to know?
Thank you so much. I am on social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Threads. My handle's the same on all of those. It's Lindsay L. O'Connor. And then my website is lindsayo'connor.com. And that is where, if you're interested in spiritual direction or Enneagram work, or I also have just resources on there for different topics that are related to some of these things. That's all on my website. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say about that. Um, I love working with people, with individuals in spiritual direction. I also, from time to time, do either workshops or small group studies or
Mhm.
things of that nature. So if there's any kind of spiritual direction, spiritual practices, Enneagram stuff that you're interested in individually or as a group, I would love to hear about it and schedule. I have on my website, you can schedule a free, like initial Zoom call and we can find out more about what you're looking for.
That's excellent. I'm a big fan of Lindsay's podcast too. I don't know if you mentioned that, but that's also a
Oh,
great place to find you.
thank you. Yes, I do have a podcast and a Substack. It's Words
Mhm.
from Silence. I have not recorded anything in almost a year, but
Mhm.
the episodes that
There
I have on there are some phenomenal interviews with. I've just Lisa was one of the guests. I was so thrilled for each of the conversations I got to have with people. And this year,
yeah.
just in my life with my kids this year, I haven't had as much time to record, but
Yeah.
yes, Words from Silence
Mhm.
is the podcast, and it's connected to my Substack where I do still write.
Yeah, so if you aren't already familiar with the podcast, plenty of things there to keep you busy till whenever it is you decide to put out another podcast. But you have a lot of resources there, and the interviews that you've done, I've really gotten a lot out of them. So I'm glad that they're up there, and I want to thank everybody for joining me. I know that I have had a little technical difficulty. I can see I didn't make it onto Substack or Facebook, so this will be a lot of replays maybe for this. And thank you if you're watching the replay. I appreciate that. And next week will be March 8th. It's also my son's birthday. Jasmine Bellamy is the founder of Love 101 Ministries. So she will be with me on this third week of Lent, where we'll be talking about the Lenten theme of prayer. And we'll be talking about how the Desert Elders prayed, but also we'll have a time of prayer too. I think the first two of these weeks have been more talking and conversation, but we haven't done any spiritual practices. So that'll be our chance to do some spiritual practices together. I'm looking forward to that. And Lindsay, this has been really great. I have a feeling we could have talked probably for another hour, maybe. And there are just so many aspects to moving through the world in generative ways that bring us healing, and where we can acknowledge the harder parts and the struggles, and also, learn about boundaries and learn about not feeling sort of guilted into sacrifice. I'm glad that we had a chance to sort of explore that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure, and I'm excited for your the follow-up sessions. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody. See you next time. Have a blessed Lent. And feel free to reach out if you want to reach out to Lindsay or me about questions about this episode or resources or where to find them. Please be sure to reach out. And I hope you subscribe on the YouTube channel. You'll get an alert for the next session, and you'll also get participation privileges because that's just for subscribers. So thank you very much and have a great afternoon.